Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our broadcast and chat hosted on Facebook. My name is Patrick Chamberlain. I'm the Director of Artistic Planning for the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra, and thank you so much for joining us. We have a very special evening in store tonight with two brilliant colleagues delving into one of the masterpieces of the choral orchestral literature, Mozart's Requiem. It's a great pleasure to welcome our special guest tonight, NJSO Principal Bassoon, Robert Wagner, and Montclair State University Director of Choral Activities, Dr. Heather Buchanan, two wonderful musicians, colleagues, and friends. So thanks for joining us tonight, Bob and Heather.
Sure, great to be here. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you for this invitation.
Wonderful. So let's just jump right in. This is such a strange, scary, weird time for musicians, for creative artists, for performers. What's it been like for you these past 5 to 6 months? What have you been doing to stay in touch with music, to stay busy, to stay sane? We'll start with Bob for that question and then take it over to Heather.
So it's weird. I actually had a point in my life where I couldn't play the bassoon. It happened about 25 years ago, and I just had a medical problem that prevented me from playing for a year. So I went through the soul searching and the lack of being able to perform music. I was still teaching, but I really couldn't perform. And this feels very much like that again, except I guess there was a similar unknown about whether I would ever be able to play again. And fortunately, it turned out I was. A little accommodation, but you know, I thought, yeah, I can do this again. Right now, I don't know whether that's going to happen. We wind players are kind of the pariahs now in the orchestra because we actually produce aerosols, which are pretty scary for all of our colleagues. And so the future for us is a big question mark right now. So, I mean, you sort of have that psychologically hanging over you. And so once again in my life, I have this, this time when music is kind of taken away from me in a way that doesn't feel really good. I mean, music is so much a part of who we are. It's what we've devoted our entire lives to. Fortunately, you know, the chances to explore new music, listening to lots of new recordings, music that I've never had a chance to really delve into, that's always an option. It's amazing though, I was listening to a little bit of the Mozart Requiem in preparation for tonight's conversation, and just emotionally how it just grabs you. And so this kind of, the way it usually does when you play it, but now it has this added little pathos on it that can't do that right now. So we're all looking forward to that time when we can be back on stage together.
What about you, Heather? What have you been up to? Again, choral singing, similar to wind playing, is one of those kind of pariahs right now. But how are you and your brilliant singers at Montclair State adjusting to this time?
Yes, well, I keep telling people that we're the leper colony of the music world because early on in the pandemic, there were some super spreading events connected with community choirs. And so we've been following the research out of Johns Hopkins, Peabody, and University of Colorado very closely and coming up with plans. So I guess I should just backtrack and say that from the get-go, I was aware that as the leader of a program, a very large program, and as someone who is a role model for my students, that the students were really watching what I was doing more than what I was saying. I mean, my own daughter is a singer and a cellist. So there you are trying to reconcile your own fears with what you're communicating as a leader of young people. And I decided early on that, although, I mean, optimistically, I guess I had my Pollyanna glasses on initially, and at first I thought it would be just a few months. I mean, Patrick, you and I remember we were talking about, we had plans for June, right? So at the point that that we realized this was going to be a little longer enterprise, the thing that changed is the how and the what. What hasn't changed is the why. why we exist, why we need music. And I'm just very grateful that several years ago I thought long and hard about the philosophical basis of the program, so that we can still use that and that investment in people. I mean, if choir is about singing together every week, then there is no choir right now. And yet we have choir at Montclair State. Some of us are singing together in a parking deck, admittedly. Others are together online doing a deep dive into diction, voice pedagogy concepts, musical analysis, somatic education. So we're breaking it down into component parts. So our philosophy is still guiding us forward, and that is, it's an investment in people and how we can provide service through our music, which we were able to do with Gratias Tibi, with the orchestra back in June. And we're using this time right now as a kind of institutional sabbatical, which is actually a lovely opportunity to explore things that you normally don't have the bandwidth to do because you're on that hamster wheel of life. So some of the things we've discovered recently is that there are ways to work with different standing formations and work with repertoire differently that can make it effective. We're currently working on doing videos. So no more talking heads on the stage. We're actually recording audio in one location, then going to another, and we're bringing the music to life through video shots that will help, we hope, to focus the listener's attention on what's important in the music at that moment. And the students are part of this conversation. So I'm just working really hard to find new ways to engage, but to keep the needs of the students as artists first and foremost in what we're doing. And I'm going to model it here so everyone can see it. The singer's resonance mask. Here it is. Everybody at Montclair State is singing with these. And as you can hear, the sound is pretty darn good with those masks on. So that's our next grand experiment, recording with those on. But we're masked at all times, many feet apart, more than 6 feet in many cases. And that's making students stand on their own 2 feet. I'm not going to lie. Some of them who like to hide a little bit are now finding themselves outed in a way that is potentially uncomfortable. So they're all learning to sing like intelligent soloists. And I'm going to take that as a win. So
wonderful. Well, it's great to hear what's going on at Montclair State and the positive way that you can continue this brilliant program that you've built, and for which collaboration with the New Jersey Symphony has been a sort of cornerstone, both for MSU and for us. Tonight, we're going to listen to a really special performance, one that is pretty well burned into my memory as a very moving evening with the New Jersey Symphony. It's Music Director Xian Zhang conducting Mozart's Requiem. And there were a couple of things about this performance that stood out to me. One was that it really was the spirit of collaboration was strong in this performance. It was the NJSO partnering with not just MSU, but another great institution. We had soloists from the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia as our quartet. And we, of course, had Heather's great choir. And of course, the Mozart Requiem, one of those pieces so iconic, so steeped in popular culture and film, in theater, and car commercials. It's one of those pieces that just continues to haunt and move and inspire and transform. Bob, when you play a work like the Mozart Requiem, when you play a choral work, does it change the way you kind of fulfill your role in your job as the principal bassoon player and what you're doing on stage?
So in some ways, yes. I mean, you have to always make adjustments when you are accompanying voices. We bassoons usually don't drown anyone out, but as musicians sitting in the orchestra, we easily can be overpowering to voices. So the idea is always to be supportive. And very often in Mozart's writing and most choral writing, there's doubling of the vocal lines in the woodwinds or very often in the string. So it's not always contrapuntal things going on, but very often we are just sort of cast in the supporting role. So the idea of always being there, it can help very often support sections that may be feeling a little like not even necessarily sure of staying on pitch with their lines, because we're right there and giving that support. But the idea is just to be accompaniment. And then, of course, with Mozart, very often we're able to step out when he just gives us a chance to be the soloist, whether we're introducing pieces or slight interludes between vocal portions of each movement. So it really is, our role is as soloists, but also mostly as an accompanying voices.
And Heather, your role as chorus master is such a crucial role in preparing the choir to that moment where it joins the orchestra on stage for the first rehearsal at NJPAC. Can you talk to us a little bit about your approach in getting a choir ready for 4 performances of the Mozart Requiem with the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra, and how you work to get them into such brilliant vocal shape for that first rehearsal?
Thank you for this question. It's a really good question. And I want to start by saying that everything that I do in this regard, I learned from my teacher and mentor, the late Dr. Joseph Flommerfelt, who was the artistic director emeritus at Westminster Choir College. And I remember asking him that question one day, and he looked at, and I said to him, do they tell you what they want? And he said, no, very rarely, if ever. And I said, so what do you do? And he said, I just prepare the music the way that I think it should be. And then I hope the choir is flexible enough to go with what they see in the moment. And so that is what I do. If I can get information from the conductor, which is rare, but if I can, I'll take that into consideration. So I study the score. I look at it from the perspective of the singer. To Bob's point, the choir will never out-sing an orchestra, but we can out-articulate them because we have language, we have words, and those words are the foundation of everything that's happening musically. So I teach the students the importance of their role in communicating the human impulses that underlie that music through the text. And working with Xian is wonderful because she is so connected to text. That is just so important to her, as it is to me. So we share that in common, that as long as they're thinking about the text similarly to her, and not always, there are times when she's got a different idea than us, but they can pivot in a moment because I've taught them to watch and respond and to be listening. So they're listening for lines in the orchestra part. At that first rehearsal with the orchestra, they're all there with their pencils listening for where they get cues from different instruments in the orchestra. They've all got a translation written into their score so that they understand what the words in the foreign language mean. And then it's about how they breathe as a group. So I've taught them a way to sort of to breathe and have their own ensemble sound very present, and then how they put that into the context of what the conductor actually wants. And in in the course of usually one rehearsal, we're then doing what the conductor wants.
Wonderful. And I know Xian so much values the responsiveness and flexibility of choirs that you prepare, and it's a hallmark for the performances that we hear.
Patrick,
Bob,
can I just add something before you ask me?
Oh,
that?
yeah.
And that is just to say, from the musician's point of view, those of us who have played so many of these pieces, in places, not just the New Jersey Symphony, but there are many churches that will, stage a Requiem or something and hire us to come and play. And so we do play with a lot of choruses. And I remember when the first time Montclair State University was, slated to appear with us, it was like, oh boy, another college chorus. Well, we'll get through this somehow. And we were just so impressed with the quality of the singing, the quality of the preparation especially. And that, Heather, you are just such a great musical partner with us, because all of that preparation that goes in before we get together for rehearsals is what makes our performances so special whenever we have
Bob,
stage with us. So
okay.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Sorry, there was a little lag and I wasn't sure if you'd finished. I remember vividly, you were the first person to approach me in the orchestra. It was in 2006, and it was Beethoven 9 with Nemi Yavi. And I remember being backstage and this person in the orchestra just coming up to me after and saying, you know, we were a little sort of disappointed when we saw that it wasn't our usual collaborator. And then we heard the choir, and you and several others came and spoke to me, and you'll never know how much I appreciated it. But yeah, to your point, it's all about what the music means. And there are several of the members of the orchestra who are also teachers at the university now. And over the years, I mean, it's been many years now, you've all become good friends and colleagues. And I ask the students to learn something from every rehearsal. So they're watching you like hawks. I mean, even though many of them are also instrumentalists, but they're all watching the orchestra very closely, because whether they're going to be teachers, therapists, or performers, or even if they're non-music majors, but they're just in this choir because it matters enough to them to sing music at this level, they're being inspired by what they see the orchestra doing. So it's a really special relationship to us, and it's one that I cherish very much.
Bob, a question for you about the Mozart Requiem. Is there a particular moment in the piece, either for your instrument or not, that really grabs you, that you look forward to, that moves you, that challenges you? Is there something that you're listening for specifically in tonight's performance? And could you share a little bit with the audience of what you're listening for?
For me, the most challenging part of the piece is the very first note. It starts with a bassoon solo, which, you know, we're always grateful for any composer who trusts us that much. But there's just something about, it's actually probably the middle of that first note, which is where I really get into it. It starts on a D, which can be a little bit of a challenging note to get in tune, first of all. And of course, there's nothing to prepare if it just has to be right there. So that's really not so hard. You make a reed that does that. But then you also want that moment to turn into what is about to happen for the next 40 minutes, you know, and it's all about how that opening begins to develop. And of course, I started as the first bassoon player, assuming the note has been attacked well. The rest of the night is going to be great. And then what I look forward to the most is every suspension that happens for the rest of the piece. There are just the most heavenly harmonies that happen. And, you know, a suspension, for those of you who don't have the musical lexicon in front of you, is just that moment where there's a clash in the music because two notes that don't necessarily fit together are pitted against each other, and then one moves away to create a different harmony. And of course, this was a very, very strong technique from the Baroque era, so Bach and Handel. And I'm always impressed. Let me just say one other thing about this. You know, I remember hearing the Mozart Requiem when I was in high school. And I think part of my high school chorus was doing part of it. And I heard the opening, well, one of the double fugue that is in the opening. And it was like, I know this tune. This tune is so familiar to me. And it was like, oh wait, that's the Handel Messiah. Those are the same notes. And it's like, oh yeah, Mozart, he did an arrangement of the Messiah, didn't he? So he really knew that. And I think he was using so many of those Baroque techniques and music that just harkened back to that. I mean, obviously, there was great regard for Handel. I know Handel, you know, Beethoven reported so often that Handel was his most inspirational composer. He just always thought of Handel as a god. And I think Handel was actually better known than Bach during Beethoven's time. So that's not to say anything bad about Bach, it's just Handel had better PR going at the time. So those are the moments. And then, of course, this is absolutely the latest Mozart. You know, this is his final year. And so where Mozart was beginning to go harmonically was into some new territory. And we get just a little bit of this in this, because I think there's still this Baroque feeling that he's trying to maintain throughout the piece. But anyway, so there are so many moments. There's not just one, but they come along and they're there. But you know, give me a good suspension any day, and this piece just has so many of them.
Wonderful, thanks, Bob. Yeah, you bring up a great point about this being the final thing Mozart wrote, the last year of his life, 1791, and you know, this piece, the Magic Flute, Clarinet Concerto, some of his just genuinely brilliant late masterpieces, all kind of have this particular character about them, unlike anything else he ever wrote. Heather, is there a moment in this piece for you or for your choir that is particularly gratifying, fulfilling, challenging, that you're looking forward to hearing tonight?
Well, there are going to be many of my students listening tonight, and I hope they will all weigh in on the chat and share with you their special moment. I know many of them love the Dies Irae for all its passion and it's sort of a bombastic thrill. But for me personally, it's a more intimate moment. It's the Lacrimosa. Lacrimosa meaning the tearful, and the way that movement opens up with that throbbing, wailing quality that we sing how tearful on that day when the guilty shall rise from the embers to be judged, and then, oh merciful Lord Jesus, spare them and grant them peace. And in just the duration of that movement, which is only a couple of minutes, we're taken on this extraordinary emotional ride. Now, of course, Mozart didn't write the complete movement. He had sketches for it, so we know that the kernels of it were reliably his. So it was obviously completed by Süssmayr. But for me personally, the technical and musical elements of the Lacrimosa are challenging, are beautiful. For me, it's one of the most compelling moments. And it's also a movement that we can excerpt and use with young people in high schools and in choral festivals, and that's something that I have done as well. I think it's really important that young musicians are exposed to the masterworks. There are some like Carmina, for example, where it's not always appropriate for younger voices to be singing it because it's just technically too difficult for young voices that are really not mature enough to handle the demands of it. But Mozart Requiem is accessible, very much so. And I think musically, technically, vocally, all of those reasons, it's a great piece for the younger ones. I know that when we announced that we were performing the Mozart with the orchestra, I didn't have to say any more. The students were there. They came, they had parts learned. There are some works that we perform with you where I almost get paid by people to sing with the choir if they could. If anyone gets sick, I'm ready, right? So Verdi Requiem and Mozart Requiem, I think, and Beethoven 9, they're the three that whenever they're programmed, everybody's out in force because they know what a privilege it is to sing that music.
Wonderful. And thank you for mentioning the Lacrimosa, Heather, because I remember vividly in these performances the way Xian approached the piece, with the Lacrimosa being the final kind of bit that had Mozart's hand in it. She played the first 20-25 minutes of the Requiem completely attacca, all the movements running directly into one another with a sort of relentless momentum. And then after the Lacrimosa, she just took a pause and she let things breathe, almost marking that this was as far as Mozart got. And I hadn't heard a conductor approach it that way before, and I remember just thinking, what a brilliant stroke to kind of mark that moment and take a breath before carrying on with the rest of the work in Süssmayer's completion. We could talk all night about this piece. It's so full of brilliance. It's so full of just things to talk about, but I know that we probably ought to get to the music. So I want to thank Heather and I want to thank Bob so much for joining us this evening, for sharing your insights behind this great work. Stay tuned. We're going to play the piece, and Heather, Bob, and myself will be adding our commentary. We'll be typing what we're hearing, our live, unfiltered, in-the-moment reactions. If you have questions for any of us about what you're hearing, we'll do our best to answer them. If you have something you want to share, throw it into the chat as well. We want this to be an interactive and immersive experience as we share together this great piece. So thank you again for joining us, and thanks again, Heather and Bob.
trono coget omnes ante Mars tot debit et natura cum resurget creatura iudicanti responsura Liber scriptus proferetur in quo totum
Thank you so much for joining us for this broadcast and chat, part of NJSO at Home, which brings you innovative digital content on the NJSO's website and social media channels. Thanks as well to Heather and Bob for their commentary and insights throughout this evening's performance. This fall, the NJSO presents an exciting series of virtual events for donors featuring a headlining roster of special guests. Our next event is Thursday, September 24th at 8 p.m. Join me for a conversation and chat with pianist Conrad Tao, featuring an archival performance of his performance of Bartók's Piano Concerto No. 3. Go to njsymphony.org/donor events to learn more and register for this event. Thank you so much and have a great evening.